right? To
And
build a
build a whole
customer base.
sales
That
organization.
that's
Yeah.
exactly right. So when you start like pulling this back, what they must have what they had to do to get this, it is really impressive. With the walkie-talkies, I've not seen the explanation on that. How I've not seen the details yet. Maybe some. I mean, maybe it's out there. Just haven't seen it as to what we've seen with the pagers. And a lot of this, we have to be getting careful what we think we know. But it's certainly this plan would have involved, the idea that it was going to be done in concert with a massive military operation. And from what we understand, the Israelis realized that Hezbollah knew about these devices, and so it became a use it or lose it moment. At the same time, too, the timing wasn't so bad anyway. I believe that for the Israelis, now is the time. You've only got 6 months before the U.S. elections. If you want the U.S. to come into war with you, if you want to use the full weight of your Israel lobby in the U.S. to pressure the Americans into doing things they don't want to do, well, you better do it now. You've only got 6 weeks. So the timing still is pretty good. And things have been ratcheting up, as we all know. I mean, the tensions were all there. Certainly, the state of war as it existed was already present. So it seemed as if it was done in a manner that was rushed, but they still hope to at least follow on with the strikes we've seen. And the strikes we have seen from the Israelis have been massive. If this isn't, if today and yesterday and the day before aren't the first days of the long expected Israel Hezbollah war, and it really should be called an Israel Lebanon war. The Lebanese army has made it clear it will be included in the war on Hezbollah's side. That if these aren't the first days of that war, I don't know what that would look like then. I mean, the Israeli Air Force is saying that they've never launched as many airstrikes as they have in a particular operation. They had 250 fighter jets take part in their air raids the last couple of days. So this is quite large. We can get in other aspects of this pager walkie-talkie attack, including whether it actually had any real effect other than the political, other than the morale aspects of it. And that seems pretty doubtful. I mean, it's not, we're not even really sure who the targets were. There's some debate out there as to how these pagers were actually used by Hezbollah. Certainly, if they were actually at military sites, the understanding is that they had a dedicated fiber optic secure system that they used. That this was mainly people who were off duty, so to speak, as well as the fact that these pagers and walkie-talkies were used by non-military aspects of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a governing structure. It's not a military. It has a military, it has an armed wing, it has a military force, but it also is the governing structure in large parts of Lebanon, particularly in the south. And so, many of these people who would have had these pagers were civil administrators, were social workers, were healthcare workers, were teachers. And of course, the idea of these things being set off in a discriminating or a targeted counter-terror operation is just complete bull. I mean, these things
Right.
went off wherever they went off. And as we've all seen, lots and lots of civilians were killed and wounded. The stories of, a little girl who her dad's pager beeps, and so she picks it up to bring it to
Yep.
him, and she gets killed, right? I mean, like,
Hmm.
everyone can imagine that moment when this beautiful little girl dutifully brings this pager to her father and is killed. And if that's not an act of terror, if that's not a gross violation of international law, the laws of armed conflict, I really don't know what is.
Well, that really, for me, removes all doubt that this wasn't a precision or targeted attack. It was
Yeah.
widespread, right? I mean, just even if you were to call into question some of the points that you had made about a lot of these devices being used by like non-military Hezbollah affiliated peoples, it doesn't matter you if you can't account for all the collateral damage that
Right.
it incurs, right? And you can't calculate that, right? You couldn't calculate the little girl picking up the pager. You couldn't calculate the person that was sitting at the I saw the one video where she's at the
Oh, the cash
grocery
register.
store, yeah,
Yeah.
at the cash register, and her face gets exploded on, right? And
Yeah.
unclear what the condition of that woman is, who was exploded. She had nothing to do with that, right? And so, but then that just kind of ties into, I believe, the policies of the Israeli military and their intelligence services of how much collateral damage they're willing to exact in order to, you know, pull the trigger, so to speak. And I think personally, it was kind of ingenious. And as much as like I'm fascinated by it from a technical perspective,
Mm-hmm.
like the logistics involved and the preparation that was needed, and just the sheer like crazy idea that someone greenlit some time ago, right? As much as I'm interested in that, I just can't help thinking about it. And I was talking to Henry before we jumped on the call that, like, why are you wasting this much energy doing something so niche and so diabolical? Why not apply that energy to having stopped October 7th in the first place, right?
Right.
Like, I feel like if you have that much creativity, that much genius, that many resources to pull something like this off, I don't know. Like it really calls into question the motivations, and and the operating policies for me, at least.
No, no, it's certainly, but this is the Israeli form of war. It is a
Yeah.
punitive, a punishing form of war meant to not only deter, but to take vengeance. And this has always been the Israeli form of war. This is the policy known as the Iron Wall, which essentially states that Israeli responses to any attacks, any threats, will be met with such overwhelming force that the other side will not just be militarily defeated, but politically and morally and defeated in the sense that they're afraid to do something again. And but you also have to combine it in with Israel itself, the way it was founded. It was founded in terrorism, whether the Stern Gang or the Irgun that come out of the Haganah, which is the predecessor to the Israeli Defense Forces. I mean, people are probably familiar with the King David Hotel attack in 1947, which many people will say that's the first example of modern terror. But that is essentially how the Israelis conduct themselves against the British authorities as well as against their Palestinian Arab neighbors. Certainly during the ethnic cleansing in the late 40s, terror was the prime aspect. What else is terrorism than going into a people's village, burning their homes down, killing all their livestock, and forcing them to flee, murdering those who put up any resistance in a brutal and often humiliating manner? I mean, you just see this over and over again. 67, it's the same thing. When Israel goes into, now particularly for Lebanon, when Israel goes into Lebanon in 82, they really define modern state terror. I mean, the way the Israelis behave in Lebanon in the 80s is brutal. I mean, they are detonating car bombs in Beirut. They're using their Christian militia proxies to carry out just vile massacres. I mean,
Mm.
vile massacres, right? I mean,
Hmm.
you see it in '06 when Israel goes back in again, and they establish what they currently have, the Dahya Doctrine, which is essentially we will mete out such punishment on the civilians of our opposition that the collapse in the society, the consequences of society will be just from this brute force we bring onto them, right? I mean, so you have it in that doctrine is named after the neighborhood that Israel essentially demolishes as a form of collective punishment, as a form of trying to weaken any type of Lebanese resistance. And of course, we see how they conduct themselves in the West Bank, how they conduct themselves the genocide in Gaza. I mean, this is using terror, whether it's the brute, violent force, whether it's the act of humiliation, or the act, and you can even apply this to the way Israel conducts itself in its affairs overseas. The use of making your opponents politically afraid of you, and you've seen
Hmm.
how well successful they are with that here in the United States and to a large degree in Britain as well.
They've coined a rather ironic term for it recently. Some Israeli officials were on video saying that this is called de-escalation through escalation.
Yeah, escalate to de-escalate. That's a standard. That's standard though. That is, if you look at
That's so
U.S.
wild.
What's scary, why everyone should really take a breath and sit down and like ponder where the hell we are as a species. That is a defining doctrine in both American and Russian nuclear warfare. This
That's
idea of
crazy.
escalate to de-escalate. That we will, and particularly for the Americans, the idea was, and the Russians have just really just disabused us of this notion quite publicly in the last few weeks, but this idea that we can escalate with the Russians because we've got Europe as a buffer.
Mm.
So if this thing does go nuclear, it's going to start off small. And so we'll lose Warsaw or we'll lose Bucharest. We'll lose Paris maybe. That'd be tragic.